Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores DORÉ ECCLES Foundation and the CLEONE Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Tonight on the Hinckley Report. As the election season heats up, local controversies make national headlines. From the classroom to masks to the U.S. Postal Service, new polling shows what Utahns think about major issues. And voters consider 7 constitutional amendments that could have lasting impacts on our state. Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have former Utah House Representative Rebecca Chavez-Houck, Matt Canham, managing director of the Salt Lake Tribune, and Rod Arquette, host of the Rod Arquette Show. Thank you so much for joining us today. Talk about politics as we get closer to the election. Everything just seems to be ramping up, and we have a lot to talk about. But first, I want to get to the 4th Congressional District. And Matt, we'll start with you. This turns out to be the most competitive district we have in the state of Utah. New polling that we have done has some numbers. Ben McAdams at 45%, Burgess Owens at 41%, Molnar at 2%, Broderick at 1%. Starting to see a little bit of a separation between the two. Not a whole lot. Tell us what you see happening in this district.
What you see is that there's going to be a flood of money that comes in. The rest of September and October, while we might see a little bit of separation now, Republicans are not giving up on their bid to remove Representative Ben McAdams from this district, which they think is winnable. And so we are going to see a flood of ads, money for other purposes. You'll see it online as well. And so there's going to be attacks. They're starting now, but they are going to ramp up and up and up.
Yeah, Rod, I've been so interested in this. I mean, the commercials are everywhere, right? And they're not positive commercials, really.
Right. Well, as Matt just said, the attack ads are on. I mean, there are 2 that have just surfaced in the past week or so, maybe even less than that. One from the Democrats, one from the Republican congressional committees, re-election campaigns, and they are going at it. And I agree with Matt. The money on this race is really going to pour in. I think the polls have shown, the Republicans have looked at these polls and have said, we think we've got a chance here, and with Burgess Owens, and Burgess, of course, really aligning with Trump as much as he possibly can. And Burgess's campaign is not only a state campaign, but you see Burgess on Fox News all the time. They are turning to Burgess a lot, and that's giving him a lot of exposure.
Representative, let's talk about how these candidates are approaching this race. And you're a former elected official, which we loved having you in that position, but you've had to run. And so you know how these commercials work, how the attack ads go. But I'm particularly interested when it comes to the favorables versus unfavorables, all right? Because every candidate is trying to, of course, drive up the favorables and keep down the unfavorables. How did you approach that, and how does that translate to this particular race?
Well, it's going to be very interesting over the next few weeks to see what happens with this negative campaigning. I think most of us who have been involved in politics for years know that Utahns usually aren't motivated by negative campaigning, but it's an unusual year. The context of the pandemic, the context of the discussion on racial justice and systemic racism, how that's been manifesting itself. I'm curious to see whether this negative campaigning will resonate one way or another. I'll have to say, in looking at the polls, what I'm, as a Democrat, probably most concerned with is that 11% not sure. There's a lot of movement that can occur there, given the distinction between McAdams and Owens and where they're marking out in terms of the polling presently. But the other thing we look at is the continued popularity of the president and how that'll affect the down ticket. So I think basically what I would see happening with McAdams is his continuing to talk about what he has done these last 2 years, making sure that he is framing what he has done and not allowing Burgess and the Republicans to frame his voting record, et cetera.
I was going to add to that. You know, the interesting thing that we had a couple of years ago was the medical marijuana vote. And that brought out a lot of people, I think. And with that not there, that may speak to what Representative Houck was talking about, the 11% undecided and where they're going to go in this campaign. And I think that's going to be interesting to see as well.
Well, let me give you a couple of numbers on Burgess to kind of talk about what the representative was getting to as well. 11% overall unsure. But when it comes to the favorables versus unfavorables, in this most recent poll, Burgess Owens at 45% favorable, 33% unfavorable. But this was one I thought was interesting. That goes to a 21% of people not sure about him as a candidate. Why is that, and what is he going to have to do?
I don't know if they know him, to be honest. I mean, Burgess is not a lifelong Utah resident. He moved here. He plays a lot on his football career, and that you know, people say, oh, okay, that's who it is. But I think there's an unknown factor. Who actually is Burgess Owens? And that's what they're still trying to figure out. And that's what's going to, you know, the Democrats are going to, you know, portray him in this regard, the Republicans in this regard. So I think there's an unknown factor in this race when it comes to Burgess Owens. Who is he?
And he's really leaning, as we talked about, into his support for Donald Trump. He's wearing his MAGA hat, he's going on Fox News, and he uses stronger language than we're used to from Republican elected officials or candidates in our state, calling Democrats Marxist or sociopaths in a recent interview in Fox News. So it's a very strong language. What you're seeing from Democrats is they're going to target his past financial problems as a way to try to define him before he can define himself. And they had a little bit of an advantage because they were on air before Burgess Owens was. And so they were trying to set the agenda and making him respond to them. We'll see if that pattern continues. You know, the Republicans are starting to go after McAdams, largely saying he's a Democrat and emphasizing that he's a Democrat, and that means he will support things that might not be in line with some of the conservative voters in that district.
Representative, to that point, it seems like there's almost a formula in this district. It's what Ben McAdams had to do last time, running as a Democrat in a district that has a +R rating for the Republicans. But it has looked historically like to win, Ben will need most of the Democrats. He'll need a percentage of the Republicans, but he really has to focus on that unaffiliated. The people don't necessarily affiliate with either one of the parties. Talk about that strategy.
Well, I think the one thing that we've known about Utah is we do have a large number of unaffiliated voters. Notably, they probably align more center-right. But those unaffiliated voters are the voters that he needs to persuade to keep him in office. And that's why I see more of his advertising focused on, this is what I've done, this is what I will continue to do, what I will continue to focus on. I think with this, as well as the Trump campaign, it's kind of this notion for voters of the devil you know. And they have a record they can look at with both, whether they're happy with either. The uncertainty of the Burgess campaign might give them just enough pause to give McAdams another term, but he is going to have to reinforce his accomplishments and show himself as a moderate and focus on politics, not party, or the community, not the party.
Okay, go ahead, Rod.
I have not seen this in the ad. I haven't seen all the attack ads yet, or on McAdams, but I haven't seen anything brought up about the impeachment vote. I mean, it seems like 10 years ago this year because so much has happened this year, but I'm surprised Republicans have not tried to take more advantage of his vote to impeach the president as of yet. Yeah. Maybe coming. We've got time, but I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I assume that has to come. I mean, Ben McAdams has done a pretty good job of limiting the places to go after him. He has been one of the most moderate Democrats in our House of Representatives, and so the impeachment vote is the easiest thing to point to, the strongest thing to point to if you're a Republican. So I would be shocked if that's not an ad soon.
Yeah. So you have to wonder if that's all yesterday's news.
Such a long time ago, it seems, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's true. People will remember. But on that one point, Matt, because everyone's talking about how you have to win this middle ground a bit, so these moderates. In this most recent poll, it was interesting. You go to those unaffiliated voters, and it was 51% of those went to Ben McAdams. So that is sort of that middle ground right there, trying to get those moderates. And is that a place that he likes to be, and is it going to be enough?
It's a place where he's been comfortable, and it's a place where he has a reputation. So he can build on that. We have seen in this district that these are very tight races historically in this area, and there has been voters willing independents or unaffiliateds and even some Republicans to vote for a Democrat. But we've also seen where Mia Love won that district with close advantages. You take out the, as Rod said, the medical marijuana vote from the last time. We don't know how that race would have turned out then. So there's a reason Republicans are targeting this.
All of you had a little theme in this too, talking about how the ticket is going to be impacted by the presidential election as well, which is certainly well. So Rod, I want to talk about our polling here on that presidential race. So this is as of this last week in Utah. Trump at 53%, Biden 35%, Jorgensen at 5%, Hawkins so far at 0%. Only 6% unsure. So
Kanye.
Oh, somehow Kanye may not have ended up on the survey there. So are you surprised about that number, Rod?
No, not really. For the fact that, first of all, there's not a strong third-party candidate this time. Evan McMullin is not in the race this time. I think Donald Trump, to a lot of Utah voters, his, the all-access stuff before the 2016 election really threw a lot of people off. But we're past that now to a lot of people, and I think they know what Donald Trump can do. And I think for some Republicans, they say, okay, we didn't know him, but we know him now. We like what he's done, so we're going to give him a little bit more support than they did last time.
Representative, what we're curious about when we see these polls, at least something I watch very closely, is looking back to the 2016 election. There seemed to be a lot of people that maybe weren't exactly telling us who they're going to vote for, right? A lot of people went into the last election thinking that another person was going to win. How serious do you think that, I don't know, the hidden Trump vote or the not so obvious Trump vote is in this election cycle?
Well, I look more to the history of elections. I was taking a look at some of the numbers last night, and you look at Utah, and we pretty much stay the course of around 66%, 70% of Republicans winning those presidential elections. And then looking at the fact that this is a second-term election, very hard to beat an incumbent, regardless possibly of what some of the things he's done during his term. I'll reflect back on what I said earlier of the devil you know, and I think that that's what I'm seeing in terms of what might happen this year with GOP voters in particular, but maybe those moderates too, of looking at what do we normally do, what do we know he is going to do. The president is doing what I might have to say is a very effective job, unfortunately, of framing the what ifs of a Biden administration. And the Biden administration, the Biden campaign really needs to step forward and start framing what a Biden administration will be, because the Trump campaign is really doing, I believe, an effective job of saying, of a very fearful-driven campaign of these are the things you can expect from a Biden campaign. Here you know what I've done. Maybe you're not completely happy with what I've done as president, but the projection, the hypothetical, setting those fears into place, that is what my biggest concerns are. There was a report released by the Census Bureau on Tuesday, and that report said that personal median income has risen by 7% before COVID-19, and poverty is at its lowest level historically that it's ever been in this country. That was before COVID-19. I'm surprised the administration, the Trump campaign, has not taken more advantage of that, saying, look after the pandemic, we get through this, depend on me to get this economy back. And they haven't taken advantage of that yet, which surprises me. The other point I wanted to make is I wonder if the Republicans and the Trump campaign are counting too much on the shy Trump voter or the closet Trump voter. That is it 1 or 2%? Someone said it could be as much as 7% of the vote. I wonder if they're counting too much on that and how big of a factor that could be in the campaign.
Very interesting. So Matt, to these great points, we thought we would ask Utahns too what they cared most about, and what Rod was just saying was what they said. It is the economy. So that's about 40% of Utahns said this is the #1 campaign issue for them, followed by the handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, which is, of course, connected to that economy as well. So tell us how these campaigns are should be approaching this, and whether or not this is going to remain the deciding factor and maybe the hidden reason why people aren't really talking about their vote so much.
I think it's interesting. I would have guessed that it would go economy and then coronavirus as the two priorities, but they are also so linked together. if you have a shutdown because of a virus, it affects your economy, right? So how the campaigns respond to it will be intertwined as well, just because the issues are. I think the Trump campaign could go back on the previous economic record, but I think for a lot of voters, they don't want to know what it was like a year ago. They want to know what you're going to do about how it is today. And I think that is a harder argument for Donald Trump to deal with, because it's hard to see an end in sight. And he is going to bear the brunt of that, just like anyone who is in office during a negative economic period it has to deal with that. So how you go about what you're going to do, I mean, that's why you see the president talk about fighting against shutdowns. That's why you see the president trying to get people to, football to restart, because it's an economic argument. And I think when you hear Joe Biden and the Democrats talk about it, they also say we're going to do a better job of tackling the virus, and that's how we're going to get the economy going. I don't know how voters will take that, but I do think it makes sense that the average person is concerned about how this affects them, and it affects them in their pocketbook, it affects them when they can't go out of their house to go to dinner, and it affects their health.
Yeah. Representative, how does that fit into your analysis there about, the Utahns at least, going with the candidate they know, at least the issues that they think they stand for, with these two issues being the top of mind?
It doesn't surprise me in the least. I'm looking at these numbers, and that holds pretty true for the way Utahns approach their lives. They want to make sure that they can take care of their families. They're very self-sufficient. They want to, not depend on the government or others to help them. They just want to be able to get back to work, and I think that that's bearing out in these numbers. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I think that what the Biden campaign really needs to do is step into what an economic recovery will look like for America under a Biden administration, bringing jobs back from overseas to the U.S., not allowing companies to shelter their money overseas, those types of things. But they really have to show how they're going to get the economy back on track, and how they can do it in a safe manner, and how they can do it in concert with finding a remedy and a vaccine and an improvement for COVID.
One more question about the presidential race. Rod, a very interesting Politico article this week where some of these presidential candidates, both the Republicans and the Democrats, trying to concentrate on members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, primarily in this story in Arizona and Nevada.
Well, those are two big battleground states. I mean, they're close states. And I'm not surprised that the Trump campaign is out there trying to harvest as many of those votes as they possibly can. If it's close, they're going to need every vote they get. They didn't get as much support, I don't think, in Arizona and Nevada from members of the LDS faith in 2016. They know they need it now. And that's why Mike Pence went to Arizona to personally address the issue there. So it doesn't surprise me. This is such a unknown, but I think most people agree, tight election. You're going to need every vote you can get, and that's what they're trying to do.
Okay. And Arizona is fascinating. If Joe Biden wins Arizona, this might be it. Like, that's a sign that he is doing very well in our country if he wins Arizona. But if you take Arizona, Jeff Flake won as a senator there. He won statewide. He is a member of this faith, and he supported Joe Biden over Donald Trump. And that might carry some weight there. So there could be some momentum where Democrats see an advantage to carve off a little bit of a vote that might mean the difference in such a tight state. I mean, I don't know enough about Arizona politics, but I do get the sense that there are certain states that it is going to be within a few percentage points of the vote. So anything you can do to make your advantage, you're going to. So we'll see a lot of that in Arizona and Nevada.
Yeah, we're going to be watching that closely. Very interesting development. I want to just use that as a connection to representative to how people are feeling about where our country is going, but particularly as our state is going, because I think that that's a connection of the message there. And I just want to talk about this polling question for just a moment. We asked Utahns, are you personally better off than you were 4 years ago. And 56% of Utahns said that they are, 34% said no, 10% said not sure. I want to give us your comment about that as it compares to what we said about whether or not they feel like the country is better off. And that's where it changes. Only 42% of Utahns said the country is better off. So help us understand that. Utahns feel like they are better off, but the country is not.
Well, I think that is a reflection of our good economy, that we've weathered both the recession and the recovery rather well here in this state. And maybe this is a residual impact of the good recovery we've had for the last 7+ years or so. We have been waiting for that recession to hit over the last couple of years, and unfortunately we didn't think it was going to be precipitated by a pandemic. But I think that this is probably a residual effect of we've had this good economy here in Utah for a number of years. I will have to say I was very surprised by those numbers, that there doesn't seem to be an ardent contrast between pre-COVID, post-COVID. I think that our unemployment numbers and how our economy here in Utah has been weathering the pandemic is an indication of these numbers also.
Well, so I'm not curious, because the pandemic numbers are playing into every part of our political discussion. Even this week, this week we had a surge of cases inside the state of Utah, and that's happening even as we're starting to get national attention for some protests we're having, but like even in St. George.
Yes, we have a small group of our population who is so against wearing face masks that they are protesting. We saw it up north in the Logan area. We saw it in St. George as well. And some of the arguments, at least from people nationally, they look at them as ridiculous. That they're making cases that this is, that are conspiracy theory based instead of public health based. Our government has done a lot of studies. They've looked, there's a lot of places where you can see do mass help, and they appear to help. And this is not a partisan issue. You have Democratic governors saying it helps and Republican governors saying it helps. They're all getting advice from public health officials. But there are people who are just against it. And we got ridiculed from what happened in St. George this week.
Well, we did. And that's happening, Rod. Even yesterday, we have the governor hosting a press conference. And from the media, I think there was at least 3 different members of the media said, why do we not have a mask mandate in the state of Utah? And that was the interesting day to ask it with the backdrop of what Matt was just talking about. Why has the governor not done it? Help us understand some of
Well, the governor believes, he has stressed, look, I'm going to leave it up to the local people, and he has for the most part. He's just on that edge. I mean, he saw the sharp spike in the numbers that we had up to 911. I don't know if he's going to do it. I mean, I think he's going to push. If you want to locally enforce this, go ahead. I'm not going to stop you at all. I think he struggles with this because he always is talking about it's up to local leaders, and if local leaders want to do it, I'm not going to impose a statewide mask mandate. I think that's a real factor there. It's a tough call for him.
There's also logic behind that. If you look at our health districts by health district, they're not all having a spike. There's plenty of parts of our state that are just like it was a week ago or 2 weeks ago. There are specific places that are spiking. Salt Lake County did go up, but it's really Utah County. Provo put in a mask mandate, but the rest of the county did not. And so when you hear the governor talk, he called out Utah County.
He did, his own county.
And essentially, he's asking them to do the right thing, and he wants it to be local. Now, here's the hard part. What if they refuse? There's 3 commissioners. One has been anti-mask, one has been pro-mask, and one has been in the middle and relatively silent. What is the county going to do? They are going to meet in the coming days, and we'll see. But if that county refuses and the spike continues, the pressure will mount on the governor.
The factor there is as well are the students. Will BYU and will UVCC come out and say, darn it, put a mask on? And I haven't heard them do that yet. Maybe they have. But I think most of the surge has come from the students in Utah County.
Yeah, it's true. I want to get to some constitutional amendments, but before we leave this issue, Representative, is it wise just to leave some of those issues? Sounds like maybe what Matt was saying is right. The whole state is not the same, but should the governors leave it to those districts then, even to take care of their own situation?
I wish we could have a mask mandate, but I think the independent streak that we have of our constituents here in Utah would really fight against that. I think that the governor has been really treading a thin line, trying to figure out how to keep the community safe, but not raise such an opposition to it that, I mean, it could be quite a flare-up in terms of people who oppose the mandating of wearing masks and how they would react if there was a state mandate. I mean, look at what happened with Provo. I mean, the mandate is there, but then people, push back. They push back pretty hard. I personally like to see BYU make it a violation of the honor code. I mean, they do have some discretion as to what they can apply in expectations as a private institution of their students. But I mean, that's not for me to call, but I think that there are other levers that should be utilized. Of course, personally, I would love to see a mandate, but I just don't think it will work here.
Okay.
Can I add one thing to that? I see a lot of people wearing masks, and will a mandate make that much of a difference? Because you go around, you go out, you shop, you go to businesses, you see a lot of people wearing masks. I don't see that many not wearing masks. Okay. And how effective would a mandate be?
I want to spend just a minute on some constitutional amendments. We have 7 of them, which is a pretty good amount for us to get to, but I just want to spend our last minute talking about one of them because I think it's what we're going to hear about a lot in the coming weeks. It's Amendment G, changing the uses of the income tax. Right now, income tax primarily given to public education and higher education, but expanding that to children and people with disabilities. Matt, how big of a deal is it to change that mix of funding?
It was huge in December, and it was huge in January, and then the world changed, and now our attention has shifted. We will see. I mean, this is a fight over tax reform. The education community largely is not fighting this, but there's concern among individuals that if you carve out some of the income tax for things other than schools, there'll be less money for schools. There won't be the increase in support that some people think schools should have. Now, our government thinks that money should be gone to other places so that they can balance out their budget, and but we'll see what happens. I mean, I don't expect this to become a hot button issue. I don't expect TV ads on this, but it will have huge ramifications for our state. Huge.
In our last 15 seconds, Representative, the legislature is pushing this still. This from both sides of the aisle?
I think we want to have that money there for our social services, our children with disabilities. My concern is that it might turn into a shell game. Looking at what happened post-recession and how there was such an ardent effort to cut funding to both social services and education, all government services, and then we spent the next few years trying to backfill and ensure that those services were available and funded appropriately. My concern is with revenues going downward because of this recession precipitated by the pandemic. Is it a shell game, and will there just be less money for both education and social services? Okay. And then it becomes this competition between those two very important resource needs.
Okay, thank you. It's got to be the last comment. Thank you for your insights today. So helpful. And thank you for watching the Hinckley Report. This show is also available as a podcast on pbsutah.org/Hinckley Report or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for being with us. We'll see you next week.